I really appreciate Dr. Black. I felt it was a real privilege to get to know him. He's my idea of a scholar and a gentleman. But I agree completely with his comments on, even though prosecution does not result in ending hate crimes, it certainly puts a damper on them. I was a witness of that myself. I went to Grenada High School in May of 1967. Mr. Ainsworth, our principal, brought us together and he said, our way of life that we've known is about to change, that there was going to be an integration of the Grenada schools in the next fall. We were targeted for integration because Grenada was a Klan stronghold. It may have been the first school integrated in Mississippi way after Brown versus Board of Education. It was only a few kids. Jesse Jackson came, Joan Baez came. And the school kids, it was only, I think, about 8, maybe 13 that went to my high school. We got to the school, there was a war going on. You thought it was Vietnam. And there were little kids in the car ahead of us, and they were standing on the seat. They were so small. They were going to go on down to the Lizzie Horn Elementary School, and they were screaming as loud as they could scream. And there were men with axe handles beating out every window in the car, and there was nothing but shards left. And so this man, if you call him a man, walked back to my mother, who was driving us to school, high school, my brother Craig and I, and he said, he told her, you better back this car up and go around that way because we're fixing to turn this car over. And so my mother was like many people who lived in Mississippi. They did not condone the violence against people of minorities, but she said, if you turn this car over, I will run over you. And they didn't turn that car over. So you don't have to be polished, you don't have to be Professor Grell, you don't have to be a lawyer to contribute to civil liberties, human rights in America. And so I encourage you to imitate people like Ani Berkeley, who later I babysat for her, and she became a neighbor later on. But she came out of her house. She lived across from the school, and she came out of her house, and she said, it's not right what you're doing. It's not Christian. And they told her to shut up and go back in the house. So anyway, I just love Peter Black.
So, are we on? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I have several comments on Dr. Black's video. First of all, that Dr. Black is doing very important work. It's just important that people are keeping the Holocaust and other hate crimes alive. That's the first comment. Alive in the consciousness of the American public, because this is a long time ago now, and he's not the only one, but if there weren't people doing that, we'd lose a very important part of our history that can help make us better, not just us here in the United States, but all over the world. And I also found interesting that as part of his work at the Holocaust Museum, that he's using what he's learned to train, educate police in protecting people's civil rights, and he's doing that right near where I live in Prince George's County. I live a few blocks from Prince George's County, but he's doing that this is a problem everywhere, but Prince George's County has had serious problems, police not being properly trained in violating people's civil rights, so that's good. So he's making a connection between what he knows as a historian and trying to make it real in people's lives. I guess the other thing, the last thing I'll mention is that I don't really know what to think about it, but I'll just mention it, which is that he repeated, towards the end of his talk, he repeated many times that he's trying to keep alive, based on his understanding of the post-Holocaust trials and other things that he knows, to keep alive the notion that there's just this basic principle that people who commit heinous acts are going to be held to account. I think what he meant by that is held to account not necessarily because they can be punished for it, but simply because making a public spectacle, and I don't use that in any pejorative sense, of making a public account of people who have committed heinous crimes like Eichmann or Demjanjuk. Or Demjanjuk was actually, eventually his conviction was overturned on appeal. And yet he also said something that I found interesting, which was that you can't prove any of this is this, meaning any of these types of public trials of people who commit heinous crimes of, mass annihilation. You can't prove that they make a difference on the ground. In other words, he was saying you can't prove that murder statutes or the death penalty deter people from committing murders. But I think what he was saying is that that doesn't necessarily matter. That it's just important to keep in people's mind this established principle that people who commit heinous counts will be held to account, because that will have a sort of moderating, decency, imposing influence on society more generally. So that's my final comment.
Do we need another one, or is it?
Yeah, if you want to, if you don't want to, that's fine. Okay, I've got some things to say.
All right, so should I do my thing now?
Just one sec.
Oh.
Okay. In response to Brian Wolfman's comments, the people who beat up the black kids in Grenada, Mississippi, it was hard to prove who did it because there were only 3 network news agencies at that time, and they broke all their cameras. But some film must have survived, and because they eventually had to show up in federal court in Oxford, Mississippi. There were no convictions. I don't even know if there were any indictments, but I do know they had to travel up to Oxford for something, and they were suspected of being those Klansmen who beat up people. I was 50 years old before it dawned on me, where were the police? Because it was so public, I mean, people from the East Coast were there with cameras, and I realized that they knew. And so these things don't go on without complicity. That's one thing I know, having lived 66 years, is that people do not commit crimes and do not get away with it without assistance. And that's why, and the focus of my practice is civil liberties, and human rights. But for some reason, I end up suing banks and every bank in the area, and hospitals. And the reason why is not medical malpractice. It's hospitals hiding records from their patients illegally that prove that they didn't have informed consent, and crazy things. But without the assistance of the public officials, it's just sort of like in Wisner, Louisiana, you could buy beer all during Prohibition, and the high school kids knew where to drive up to and honk, and they'd bring it right out. You know that there is assistance there, coverage that's being paid. And so it's a very exciting area of law. I encourage you to participate in it.